He only knew that the woman was cold. He only knew that her hands were shaking. Vincent Haverford noticed the hands first. That was always how it started with him. The hands. 41 years in corporate law had trained him to watch hands the way other men watched faces. Hands told you what faces had learned to hide. He had stopped at the corner of Queen and Portland because the light was red, and because his knee was doing that thing it did in November, that slow grinding complaint that had started somewhere around his 58th birthday and had never really stopped since. He was holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm, and he was thinking about nothing in particular. The Aldgate file, maybe, or the dinner he had canceled on his daughter for the third time this month. When he saw her, she was crouched beside a bus shelter. Not sitting on the bench inside it, but crouching beside the frame, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around a canvas bag that was too small to carry much of anything useful. She looked about 11 or 12. Dark hair plastered against her forehead from the rain, a jacket that belonged to a warmer season. The light changed. Vincent did not move. He was not a man who stood still on sidewalks. He had built an entire life on forward motion. The next brief, the next meeting, the next flight to somewhere that needed him to be there by Tuesday. His assistant Beverly had once told him, only half joking, that his calendar had more entries than a hospital admissions log. He had laughed because it was true, and because laughing was easier than examining what that meant. But he stood still. The girl sneezed, and the sneeze was so large for such a small person that it knocked her off balance, and she grabbed the bus shelter frame to steady herself, and Vincent watched her look at her own hand afterward. Look at it the way you do when you are hoping no one saw. Someone had seen. He crossed the street. He did not plan what he was going to say. Planning was for the office. Out here, on a Tuesday evening in November with the rain coming sideways off Lake Ontario, planning felt beside the point. "Excuse me," he said. She looked up. She had the specific wariness of a child who had learned that adults addressing her without introduction usually wanted something she couldn't give them. Her eyes were dark and steady and much older than the rest of her face. "Is the 5-1 running?" he said. "The streetcar. I can never get the app to load." It was not what he had intended to say. He didn't know what he had intended to say. But the girl blinked, and the wariness shifted slightly, and she pulled a phone from her jacket pocket. A cracked phone, the screen held together at one corner with what appeared to be a piece of clear tape, and looked at it. "It says 12 minutes, she said, "but it's usually more like 20. "That sounds about right," Vincent said. He stood there for a moment, doing the mental arithmetic that city people do, calculating how much attention you owe a stranger, how much you're allowed to give before it becomes something else, something the other person didn't ask for. "You go to school around here," he said. She hesitated. "Dovercourt. Good school," he said, though he had no way of knowing whether this was true. "Long way to be waiting in the rain." She didn't answer that. She tucked the phone back into her pocket and pulled the canvas bag a little closer. Vincent set his coffee cup on the ledge of the bus shelter, a surface designed, he had always thought, more for pigeons than for people, and looked at the rain and the streetcar tracks gleaming under the headlights and the Shoppers Drug Mart across the street with its relentlessly cheerful illuminated sign. "Are you waiting for someone?" he said. Another pause. "My mom works at the Loblaws on College. She gets off at 8. It was 10 past 6. Vincent did the math again. Different math this time. "That's a while," he said. "I know. Have you eaten?" The question sat between them for a moment like something that had fallen from a pocket, neither of them quite sure whose it was or what to do with it. "I'm fine," she said. It was the answer he had expected. It was also, clearly, not true. He had cross-examined enough witnesses to recognize the particular flatness in a voice that was trying to sound unbothered and hadn't quite got there. "There's a Tim Hortons on the next block," he said. "I was going to get something before my knee decided it had opinions about this weather. You'd be doing me a favor if you walked with me. Someone to complain to." She looked at him with those careful measuring eyes. "I don't know you," she said. "No," Vincent agreed. "My name is Vincent Haverford. I'm a lawyer. I've been coming to this corner for 20 years because my firm is 3 blocks that way." He pointed. "You can text your mom the location right now if you want. Queen and Portland, heading west on Queen. And I'll walk slowly because of the knee, so you could outrun me easily, which I say not as a threat but as a statement of unfortunate fact." Something moved in her face that wasn't quite a smile but was related to one. "Imogen," she said. "Nice to meet you, Imogen." They walked. He matched her pace, which was slower than his normal stride, and probably about right for the knee anyway. The rain had eased slightly, but the wind had picked up, coming off the lake with that particular Lake Ontario conviction that Vincent had lived with for 62 years and still hadn't made peace with. "What do you want to be?" he asked as they passed a dry cleaner and a Portuguese bakery with its windows fogged from the inside. "What? When you grow up?" What are you aiming at? She was quiet for half a block. He'd learned over the years that the quality of a person's silence told you almost as much as what they said. I don't know yet, she said finally. Maybe a vet. Or maybe something with computers. My teacher says I'm good at math. Math is useful, Vincent said. I wished I'd been better at it. Went to law instead, which is mostly math except the numbers are replaced with words and everyone argues about what the words mean. This time the not-quite smile became something more definite. Is that what lawyers do, among other things? He pushed open the door of the Tim Hortons and held it for her. We also drink a lot of bad coffee and pretend we're not tired. She went in ahead of him. He watched her clock the room the way kids from uncertain situations learn to clock rooms, exits, tables, who was sitting where. It was a habit he recognized because he had spent 3 decades watching it in courtroom witnesses, the particular spatial alertness of people who had learned that environments could change on you. She chose a table near the window. Good visibility. He noticed that too. What do you want? He said at the counter. Just a tea, she said. Thank you. Have you eaten today, Imogen? She looked at the table. I had breakfast. It was nearly 6:30. He ordered a soup and a grilled cheese and a hot chocolate and a tea and a bowl of chili and his own coffee. And when he brought it to the table, she looked at the tray with an expression he recognized. From somewhere deep himself. The expression of receiving something they needed badly and hadn't asked for. The soup and the grilled cheese are yours, he said. The chili is mine. I'm supposed to be watching my sodium, but my cardiologist is in Oakville, and what happens in the downtown core stays in the downtown core. She laughed. It was an unguarded laugh, the kind that escapes before you can decide whether to allow it, and it changed her whole face. They sat. The rain tapped against the window. Someone across the room was having a conversation in Portuguese that had the lilting, emphatic quality of a very important disagreement about something minor. The Tim Hortons smelled the way all Tim Hortons smelled, coffee and fryer oil and something faintly sweet, and it was warm in the way that only mattered when you had been cold outside. Imogen ate the soup carefully. She was not a person who ate quickly, which told Vincent something about how she had learned to make things last. Do you come to this corner often? He asked. Waiting for your mom, I mean, sometimes. When she has late shifts and I can't stay at school. She wrapped both hands around the hot chocolate. Usually I go to the library, but it closes at 6. That's inconvenient. She said it without self-pity, which was worse than if she had said it with some. Self-pity at least acknowledged that something was wrong. This matter-of-fact tone said that this was just the shape of Tuesdays, that this was simply how the hours between school and 8 o'clock arranged themselves. What about your dad? Vincent said, and then caught himself. Sorry, that's not my business. It's okay. A pause. He's in Sudbury. We don't really talk. Right. Vincent stirred his coffee. He had a daughter of his own, 34, lived in Westdale, worked for an architecture firm that did things with sustainable materials that Vincent didn't fully understand but was proud of anyway. He had not seen her since September. This was not her fault. This was the shape of his Tuesdays and Wednesdays and most of the other days too. Your mom, he said. She works nights a lot? She works whatever shifts they give her. She's been trying to get more day shifts, but Manuela, that's her manager. Manuela schedules based on seniority. A small, pragmatic shrug. We've been there 2 years. It takes time. There was something in the phrase, it takes time, that sat in Vincent's chest in an uncomfortable way. It takes time was a thing people said who had learned to be patient about things that should not require patience. Do you mind if I ask? Do you have family nearby? Grandparents, aunts and uncles? My grandma is in Mississauga. She has her hip. Imogen seemed to understand that this was self-explanatory, and it was. A grandmother with a hip was a grandmother who could not easily become an after-school solution on a Tuesday in November. She had finished the soup. She was working through the grilled cheese with the same deliberate care. What do you like in school? Vincent asked. Math. I said that. You said your teacher said you were good at it. That's not the same thing as saying you like it. She looked at him. He had the sense that not many adults had noticed that distinction. Okay, she said. Yeah, I like it. I like that it's. There's always an answer. Like, you can go looking for the answer and it's actually there. It's not just she stopped. Opinion, Vincent said. Yeah, that's a good reason to like math. He had argued both sides of enough cases to know exactly what she meant. The exhaustion of a world made entirely of interpretation. The relief, sometimes, of a thing that was simply true. She was looking out the window. The streetcar went by, the 501, its lit windows moving through the rain. You really are a lawyer, she said, for my sins. What kind? Corporate. Mergers and acquisitions, mostly. I help companies decide whether to join together or leave each other alone, and then I handle the paperwork when they do either. Is that interesting? He considered the question seriously, which he suspected she had expected him not to do. Sometimes, the people are interesting. The work is interesting when it's complicated. There's a particular pleasure in finding the solution to something that looked unsolvable. He glanced at her. Like math. She turned this over. I never thought about law like that. Most people don't. Most people think about it like arguing. And there's arguing, yes. But underneath the arguing, there's usually a puzzle. Who owns what? What was meant by which words? What happens when two things that were built separately have to become one thing, and all the edges don't quite line up? What happens, she said. You find the edges that do line up, he said. You start there, and you work outward. Outside, the rain had started again in earnest. They stayed in the Tim Hortons for another hour. Imogen had the tea. He had a second coffee that he absolutely did not need, and which his cardiologist would have had things to say about. They talked about the math curriculum at Dovercourt. He gathered it was more interesting than he would have expected from a public school. They talked about whether Toronto winters were actually getting warmer or whether this was wishful thinking. She mentioned, offhandedly, that she had read every book in a particular science fiction series and that the last one had disappointed her. And he asked her why, and she explained it with a precision and a vocabulary that made him revise upward, significantly, his estimate of what she was capable of. At 10 to 8, she checked her cracked phone. I should go meet her, she said. Of course. He stood, which took slightly longer than it used to. Imogen, can I ask you something? She looked at him with those careful eyes. Is Tuesday the only night this happens? Or is it most nights? A silence. Not the silence of evasion, but the silence of someone deciding how honest to be with a person they had just met and had, in spite of everything, mostly decided to trust. Tuesday and Thursday, she said. Sometimes Friday. He nodded. He did not say what he was thinking, which was that he had a daughter he hadn't seen since September and a calendar that Beverly kept updated to within the minute and 3 hours a week that apparently no one was using well. Okay, he said. It was good to meet you. She put on her jacket, which was too light for November and always would be until someone fixed that. She picked up her canvas bag. At the door, she stopped. Thank you, she said. For the soup and the thank you. Thank you for the company, he said. And for the 501 information. That almost smile again. Then she pushed through the door and into the rain and was gone. Vincent sat back down. He looked at the empty soup bowl and the half-finished hot chocolate and the door that had just swung shut, and he thought about his daughter in Westdale, who he had not called in 6 weeks, and his cardiologist in Oakville, and the Aldgate file, and the 3 hours a week that apparently no one was using well. He left a larger tip than he normally would have and went back to his office and worked until 11. He did not think about the girl the next day. Exactly. He thought about the gap she had described. The 2 hours between 6 and 8 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the way she had said, it takes time with no particular bitterness. He thought about it the way you think about a problem that doesn't yet have a category. You don't think about it directly, but it's there, sitting in the background of your mind like an open window. On Thursday, he left the office at 5:10, which was early for him, and walked to the corner of Queen and Portland. She was at the bus shelter, same canvas bag, different jacket, this one with a broken zipper that she'd safety pinned at the collar. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and the wariness came back for half a second before it resolved into something else. You came back, she said. I was in the neighborhood, he said, which was approximately true in the sense that 3 blocks was approximately no distance at all. Your knee? She said, still opinionated. They went back to the Tim Hortons. He didn't make a production of it. He ordered, she chose, they sat. She told him about a test she had written that afternoon. Fractions and ratios, which she had found easy enough that she'd had 15 minutes to spare and had gone back and checked her work twice. He told her about a merger that had gone sideways because of a clause that 3 different lawyers had read 3 different ways, and the satisfaction, 17 hours later, of finding the 4th way that made all 3 of them technically correct. How did you find it? She said. I went back to what the words were actually trying to do. Not what they said, what they were for. She thought about this for a long time, stirring her hot chocolate. That's what my teacher does, she said, with word problems. She says figure out what the problem is actually asking before you start solving it. Smart teacher. Yeah. A pause. She's leaving in January. Maternity leave. Ah, the substitute they have lined up doesn't really know math. He understood this was not a complaint. It was information, delivered in the tone of someone who had learned to manage disappointment by documenting it accurately. They developed a rhythm over the following weeks. He did not plan it as a project or a commitment. He did not tell anyone at the firm. Not Beverly. not his junior partners, not the colleague who had started asking pointed questions about why he seemed to be leaving the office before 7. He showed up on Tuesdays and Thursdays because there was a girl who had nowhere warm to be, and because the alternative was being in his office, thinking about the Aldgate file, and because somewhere along the way, the warm corner of that Tim Hortons had started to feel like something he was not willing to examine too carefully. Imogen did not treat him like a charity case, which he came to understand was something she did for him as much as for herself. She asked him questions, difficult ones. She wanted to know about the law, about how a person became a lawyer, about what kind of marks you needed, about whether it was true that lawyers had to argue for things they didn't believe in. He answered seriously. The way he answered junior partners who had something worth listening to, and she received the answers the same way. Not with performance or gratitude, but with the plain attention of someone taking in information they intended to use. He learned, over time, that her mother was named Celeste and had come to Toronto from Montreal when Imogen was 4, following a job that had disappeared within a year and had been replaced by other jobs, harder ones. A series of practical decisions arranged in a chain that had led, eventually, to the overnight stock shift at Loblaw's and the Tuesday and Thursday gaps. He learned that Imogen was 12, that she had been 12 for 3 months, that she would be 13 in February and had not said anything about this to her mother because she knew her mother would try to do something about it and there was nothing to be done. He learned that the cracked phone had been cracked for 7 months. He did not say anything about any of this. He didn't arrange anything, didn't make calls. He understood that what Imogen had given him, over soup and hot chocolate in a Tim Hortons on Queen Street, was not a list of problems to be solved. It was trust, which was a different thing, and which required a different response. In the second week of December, his daughter called. He was walking back from the Tim Hortons when his phone rang, and he answered it the way he always answered calls, prepared to be busy, and then heard her voice and stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. "Dad, are you screening me?" "No," he said. "No, I'm outside. I'm on Queen Street." "Queen Street? Why are you on Queen Street at 7:15 on a Tuesday?" He looked back at the Tim Hortons with its lit windows and its November crowd of people who were wet and tired and warming up. He thought about how to explain what he was doing there, and decided that the true explanation was not something that could be usefully compressed into a phone call on a wet Tuesday sidewalk. "I've been spending time in the neighborhood," he said. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," his daughter said. You missed my birthday dinner, and Graham's birthday, and the renovation thing we did in September that I told you about 3 times. "I know," he said. "I know I did. I'm not calling to make you feel bad. You're not making me feel bad. You're stating facts, Dad." "Charlotte." He said it more gently than he'd intended. "I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry. Not the kind of sorry that comes with an excuse attached. Just the plain kind. A silence. Not the silence of someone deciding to forgive him. It was too early for that. But the silence of someone reassessing which version of this conversation they were having. "Are you okay?" she said. "I'm better than I was," he said, which surprised him by being true. "Are you free on Sunday?" "I'll come to Westdale. I'll bring lunch." Another pause. "Graham makes his own bread on Sundays. Tell Graham I'll bring the cheese." She laughed. It sounded like relief. It sounded, he realized, like Imogen's laugh, that unguarded kind, the kind that escapes before you can decide whether to allow it. "Okay," Chart said. "Sunday. Bring a good cheese." He put the phone in his pocket and stood on the wet sidewalk for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. The lake was somewhere south of him, invisible behind the buildings, doing what the lake did in December. The streetcar went by. He went home and called his cardiologist's office and left a message about rescheduling the appointment he had canceled in October. In the 3rd week of December, he went into the office of a colleague who ran a foundation that did education work. He did not explain why he was asking exactly. He mentioned, vaguely, a situation he had become aware of. A kid, strong in math, inconsistent school support, mother working irregular hours. His colleague made some notes and asked some questions and gave him a name at the Toronto District School Board. He passed this information to Imogen not as a gift but as a neutral fact, the way you might mention that a streetcar route had changed. He told her that there were programs, mentorship programs, after-school programs, bursary programs, that were not well publicized and that required someone to ask about them specifically, and that if she or her mother wanted to ask, this was the name of the person to ask. She took the information with the same plain attention she gave everything else. "Why are you telling me?" she said. "Because you asked me once how to find the answer when the problem isn't obvious," he said. "You go to the person who knows where the answers are kept." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you do? As a lawyer?" "It's most of what I do, yes," She nodded slowly. The hot chocolate was getting cold. Outside, the first serious snow of the season was beginning to come down, not the tentative early December kind, but the real kind, the kind that settled in and meant it. My teacher, she said. The one leaving in January. Yes, she told me once that the most useful thing she ever did was ask someone who actually knew. She looked at the snow. I think she was talking about something else, but it's the same idea. It usually is the same idea, Vincent said. They did not see each other in the week before Christmas because the firm's year-end had arrived with its customary violence, and because Imogen's mother had managed to negotiate 3 days off, which meant there were no gaps to fill. He sent a card to the address she had mentioned once, in the context of an errand she'd run. He put a bookstore gift card inside it. A reasonable amount, not a statement, not a gesture that required anything in return. He signed it, V. Haverford. Tim Hortons, Tuesday and Thursday. He spent Christmas in Westdale. He brought a very good aged cheddar from a shop on Roncesvalles. Graham's bread was genuinely excellent. Charlotte showed him the renovation, the kitchen they had finally finished, and he looked at it and said the true things, about it, which were that it was beautiful, and that she had always had a better eye for these things than he did, which she had learned from her mother, who had learned it from nobody, because it was simply something she had arrived with, the way certain people arrive with a gift for music or for kindness or for knowing which way the wind was going to turn. He did not think about the office on Christmas. He thought about it on Boxing Day, but less than usual. In January, Imogen's mother spoke to the name at the school board. He knew this because Imogen mentioned it, matter-of-factly, on the first Thursday of the new year, sitting in their usual corner of the Tim Hortons with the snow coming down outside and the heating system working harder than it was probably designed for. She called, Imogen said. Good, there's something called a STEM stream at a school in Etobicoke. You have to apply, but my teacher, the old one, before she went on leave, she already wrote a reference. He held his coffee cup and said nothing. It's a lottery if you meet the criteria, Imogen said. I meet the criteria. A pause. My mom cried a little when she found out. That's allowed, he said. I know. She was looking at the table. She doesn't cry very much. She thinks it sets a bad example. It doesn't, Vincent said. I know that too. The snow outside was coming down in the large, slow flakes that meant it was not going to stop soon. The Tim Hortons was warm. A man near the counter was reading a newspaper the old way, folded into quarters, the way people used to on the subway, and it made Vincent think of his father. And the way his father had read the Globe every morning without variation for 40 years. And of all the things that persisted in the world without anyone particularly deciding to preserve them. Mr. Haverford, Imogen said. He looked at her. Why did you come back? She said. On Thursday, the second week. You didn't have to. He considered several answers, which was a habit from the law. You considered the available answers before choosing one, because the wrong answer given quickly was harder to walk back than the right answer given slowly. Because the problem was interesting, he said, and then because that wasn't quite right. Because you were interesting, and because he stopped. Because, she said, because I had been very busy for a very long time. He said, and I had confused being busy with being useful, and I think I needed to be reminded of what useful actually looked like. She thought about this. Is that a lawyer way of saying you were lonely, she said. He laughed. He had not laughed like that, the unguarded kind, in longer than he could accurately calculate. Yes, he said, I think it is. She nodded, as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. She drank her hot chocolate. The lottery results came in March. She texted him. She had his number by then, added with the same matter-of-fact practicality with which she approached everything. A single message at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening while he was in a deposition that had already run 2 hours past its scheduled end time. I got in. He excused himself for 3 minutes, went to the hallway, and read it again. He wrote back, I knew you would, which was not strictly true. It was a lottery, after all, and the math of lotteries was not the kind of math that yielded to effort or intelligence. But it was true in the way that mattered, in the way that the best arguments he had ever made were true. Not factually certain, but directionally accurate, aimed at something that was real even before it became real. She wrote back, my mom made spaghetti. He wrote, that's the right response to good news. He went back into the deposition. They still met on some Tuesdays. Less from necessity now. Celeste had moved to a better shift, and Imogen had the STEM program orientation running into March. And more because the corner at Queen and Portland had become a habit neither of them had decided to break. He told Charlotte about it in April, over the phone, on a Sunday when Graham was making bread, and Charlotte had stepped into the garden for the particular kind of quiet that gardens offered in spring. A 12-year-old? Charlotte said. 13, as of February, and you've been having soup with her every week since November, approximately. A pause. Dad, that's actually quite something. It didn't feel like quite something at the time. It felt like soup. Soup is something, Charlotte said, with the certainty of someone whose professional life involved thinking carefully about how small choices aggregated into structures. You know that, right? Soup is absolutely something. He did know that, he realized. He had known it since November, since a bus shelter on a Tuesday with the rain coming sideways, since a pair of hands reaching for a canvas bag that was too small to carry much of anything useful. He had known it since Imogen had looked up at a stranger with careful measuring eyes and decided, against all reasonable evidence, that trust was a risk worth taking. He had never told her what he did exactly. Not the full of it, not the name of the firm, or what it was worth, or what it meant in the specific taxonomy of Toronto professional life that sorted people by building and floor and postal code. He had told her he was a lawyer, and she had told him her name, and they had walked to Tim Hortons, and the rest of it had followed. This was the detail he came back to, in the end. Not that he had helped. That was true. But it was a limited truth. Not that she had helped him. That was truer, and went further. But that she had not known, and it had not mattered, and the not knowing had made a space in which something real could happen. She was heading to Etobicoke in September for a school full of math problems that actually had answers. He had an appointment in Oakville with his cardiologist that he actually intended to keep. Charlotte was talking about Easter dinner. His knee was still opinionated about the weather, which meant, presumably, that there would still be reasons to stop on sidewalks and look at things. The story stayed where it began, on a wet corner in November, between a man who had forgotten how to stop and a girl who had not yet learned to start, and the 2 hours between 6 and 8 when the city was cold and the library was closed and the streetcar was always a few minutes later than the app suggested. That was where it had started. That was where it remained. He had not known it would matter. She had not known who he was, and those two facts, taken together, were the only reason any of it had been true.